Welcome to today's episode of The Irresistible Factor. I have a guest that I'm really excited about today. Her name is Ali Bonar, and you may have heard of her. She is the founder and CEO of a brand called Oat Haus, and also quite an influencer in her own right. So, really excited to have you on today to share your story, Ali.
Yes. Oh, I'm so excited to be here. Thanks so much for having me, and
Yeah,
thanks
thank
everyone for
you.
listening.
So I want you can go in whatever order you want. Oat House is obviously a really interesting brand of granola butters, and you also have an interesting story that led you to the brand. So why don't we start with your story and how you wound up being a founder of this brand?
Definitely. I know. I feel like everyone has a different
Yeah.
path to founding their company. Some people feel like, it's from birth, and then people like me actually kind of stumbled into becoming an entrepreneur. So prior to this, I actually was working at a company called Doximity, which is a health tech company, was living in San Francisco. And then in college, I was actually pre-med. So on the track
Wow,
to become a
that's
doctor, which is very
wild.
different.
That's wild.
Very different, yeah, than being a food founder. But I always loved food. I studied nutrition in college. That was my major. So I knew that food was definitely a big part of my life. But early on, it was from my fascination with food was from a place of fear rather than love, I would say. So struggled with multiple eating disorders for over a decade. So orthorexia being the main one, which people may or may not have heard of. It's becoming kind of more well known these days, but it's an obsession with eating perfectly clean all the time, perfectly healthy all the time. So it sounds great, right? Like it sounds like amazing. Everyone wants to eat healthier. But I think the difference is it's not a value add. And that's how at least I, you know, describe it, because obviously eating healthy is good for you. But the way that I was approaching food and my life, it was so obsessive and toxic and, stressful. I think, anyone can say that going out to dinner is like a lovely, enjoyable experience. But just to give you a snapshot at that time, if someone said, "Hey, do you want to grab dinner?" It wasn't like, "Oh, yeah, that sounds great." It was like, me researching everything on the menu and like just
Oh,
stressing about it all day and meticulously, planning, okay, what am I going to eat leading up to that to kind of balance out what I'm going to have at the restaurant. So it was just, yeah, I felt like I was living in this mental prison that I had created for myself. And ironically enough, no one knew that I was struggling because physically I was actually in a bigger body than I am now because I was also binge eating. So that was another eating disorder that I struggled with. So obviously when you restrict so hard and you deprive yourself of all of the pleasures in life regarding food, you're going to fight back. Your body biologically is going to rebel. And so, I would have these moments where my willpower just it ultimately ran out as everyone does, and I was tired or whatever, and I would just have one cookie, and then I would just tell myself, oh, like, you just screwed up your whole day of eating perfect, and then I would eat the whole rest of the sleeve of cookies, and and that would kind of trigger a binge. So it was really just this restrict binge cycle that I was in for almost a decade. And I'm exhausted just telling you because it was such an exhausting way of existing. And it's interesting, actually, as I'm even telling you this now, it almost feels like I'm telling someone else's story because it was just, a whole different lifestyle. And I can really empathize with people going through it because when I was in the depths, it felt like I was at the bottom of this, hole and I couldn't dig myself out. And I think also one of the hardest things about struggling with food is you're really embarrassed and you're really ashamed to talk about it. And so I wasn't, telling my friends or even my family that this was going on. And so I felt really alone. And that's kind of why I do what I do today, which is talk really openly about my story, because I wish I had someone out there when I was struggling that was just sharing really raw and real, depiction of what they're going through, because I thought I was the only one. And we always think like we're the only ones going through
I
these things,
know.
but
I
in
know.
reality, yeah, it's not the case. So,
It's so true because, I mean, first of all, that's one of the reasons I started the podcast because I was talking to so many founders who were under so much pressure and feeling like they were the only ones. And I knew they weren't because I was talking to all of them. And I also had a similar experience with food, but calorie counting, the same way that you looked at things before you went somewhere, I would do the same thing to plan what I was going to eat so I wouldn't ruin everything. And then the second I would ruin it, I would ruin it. And it was
mhm.
an endless cycle, and I never talked about it. I was way too embarrassed to ever mention it to anyone. So I think that it's so great that people are starting to talk about it because it is a really lonely, shitty place to be. It is. And
Mhm,
how did you get
mhm.
out of it? How did you sort of pull yourself away from it?
Right, yeah. No, I mean, it's such a tough place to be, and I think one other thing I wanted to mention too is it's definitely a spectrum. So,
Yeah.
I think when you hear even just the term eating disorder, like, I never resonated with that
Yep.
until much, after my recovery actually started because I was like, "Oh, I'm not that bad. Like, I am not underweight. I'm not skin and bones." I think we think of all these things as like
Yeah.
classic stereotypical eating disorder. I was like, "I'm actually, like above weight probably." So, eating disorders come in all shapes and sizes and also the severity, right? It's like you don't have to be hospitalized to have an issue with food.
Yes.
But yes, how did I get out of it? So yeah, 10 years in, finally, some little voice inside was like, this is enough. Like, I cannot live like this anymore. And finally reached out for help. This woman who also was based in the Bay Area, she's, a food kind of therapist, nutritionist. And I just started following her on Instagram, and something about her page like really spoke to me. And I ended up reaching out, and she was the first person I told about what I was going through. And I feel like half of the healing process even just took place by just telling her. It was like this huge weight was lifted off my shoulders, the secret that I've been hiding for 10 years. And so I think it's like as soon as I told someone, it also held me accountable of like, okay, someone else knows, I really need to follow through and
Yeah.
get my act together. So that was in 2016. And then how my product kind of came into all this is a huge part of my recovery process was reintroducing a lot of these foods that I did not allow myself to eat for many years. So for me, that was nut butters. And as I started to add nut butters back in, my body was just obviously not used to eating them. And so I had a hard time digestively just, handling peanut butter and almond butter. And so as I'm sort of like getting my health back to baseline, my nutritionist recommended, like, why don't you try, sunflower seed butter, soy nut butter, some of these like nut free spreads on the market. I don't have a nut allergy, so I never had to try those things. And when I did, I quickly realized they were just not the best tasting and
Mhm.
just like not a great option for people that need to eat them.
Yeah.
So selfishly just created something for me. And I was really inspired by, oat milk. Oatly was popping up everywhere at the time, and sort of had this epiphany that if you could create a milk out of oats, you could create a spread out of oats. And that's where the initial idea for our product, which is the first oat based spread, was born. So that's where it started. It was 2017 when I started making it in my kitchen in San Francisco. And then we launched the next year in 2018, just online.
Were
Yeah,
you
early
still working at the
2018.
time? Were you still working your other job? Yeah.
Yes, I was still working in tech for actually about a year after
Yeah.
we launched, so until 2019. And the main reason for that was just financially, I was living in San Francisco. I couldn't afford to leave my full-time job.
Yeah.
And then secondly, I just didn't know if people were even going to understand what granola butter was because it wasn't a surefire like no one had heard of this before. And so
Yeah.
I know it
Yeah.
sounds glamorous to like come up with the first of something, but it's actually pretty challenging and adds like so much work.
Another layer, right? Because you have to educate before you can even sell something because people don't know what it is. And I think when I first saw you, I think I saw you at Fancy Food, right? Or maybe it was at Expo. Were you at Expo?
Yeah, both. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So one
Fancy
of
and
those
Expo.
two. I didn't know what it was either. So, and I'm really in this business, like I do a lot of work in the food business. So I think that the educating part is always a big challenge because before you can even get to marketing and getting people involved with the brand, you have to make sure they know what it is and why. Um,
Yeah.
you have a lot of your own personal followers, and was that first? Did that happen pre Oat Haus? And was that based on the stuff we just talked about?
Exactly. Yeah. So, yeah, prior to launching our company, I started to document just honestly for myself as like a virtual diary
Yeah.
on Instagram because I've always been like, even from an early age, I mean, at my parents' house, I just have like journals and journals. Like, I was just a blogger, like before bloggers were,
Yeah.
a thing. I just love to share and I love to talk about my experience. It's cathartic for me. I mean, selfishly, it's like a personal thing where it just actually really helps me process things. But then, the upside is that it also helps other people going through something similar. So, yeah, I had no idea what an influencer was. I wasn't trying to become a content creator, but it just sort of like fell in my lap, similar to our business. There's a trend there. And so, yeah, created a small little, like 10,000, followers or so, but it was a great little launch pad test market for our product. So we launched 100% on D2C on Instagram. Actually, we did pre-orders and we just kind of wanted to test the waters and see, is this something people even understand? And I think we fell in this perfect sweet spot because innovation can be almost, ahead of its time, right? Like, I know there's been companies that similar to the iPhone, but they've launched like before Apple. And I think like there's this Venn diagram of you need something that's familiar enough and you need something that's
Mhm.
innovative enough, and it has to fall on that sweet spot. So I think for us, it was like granola and nut butter are just two really, classic Americana familiar items in, for anyone who's shopping in their pantry. So I think combining the two, it wasn't like too wacky or too
Yeah.
weird.
Yeah.
I think that's why it did kind of stick.
And when did you realize that you were onto something that could become a brand, not just something for you yourself?
I think when we got into Whole Foods, that was a really important validating point. Um, I think we didn't have any kind of playbook at that time. We didn't know what we were doing. I just reached out to the Whole Foods buyer. I found her name on LinkedIn, and then I just tested, different email formats until I didn't get a bounce back because I didn't have her email. Finally got samples to her. She was super excited about it, and definitely saw the vision.
Oh.
I think people either get it, they see the vision, or they don't in terms of retail buyers. Like we've definitely had some retail buyers, not going to name names because we're in their store now, but who like just definitely didn't get it at the beginning. And then
Yeah.
finally they'll reach out, maybe a year or two later and say, okay, all of the data is telling me I need to bring this item in, kind
Yeah.
of like reluctantly, like I still don't
Yep.
understand this, but
Yep.
apparently customers want it. So we've had two different, responses, but Whole Foods was the first. They were our first partner that really took a chance on us and they brought us in, and I'll forever be grateful for that because, they got it early on when we didn't have any data, we didn't have any real following. And so I think when that happened, I knew, okay, if one of the largest, most important natural players in the space is understanding this, then other people will too.
When how long were you just doing DTC before you got into Whole Foods?
We were doing D2C for about a year and then got into Whole Foods June 2019, which was like a year and a half after we
Okay.
launched.
So you
We
knew
were
something,
majority,
right?
yeah, we were majority D2C though, even after that for a while until we launched Target last year nationwide. That really skewed things the other direction.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Wow. And what made you think, like, what was happening on with that business that made you think that you would be able to get distribution? Like, were you starting to get a lot of traction? Were you growing the consumer base organically or some other way? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Definitely. Yeah. So Target actually came to us. I think they saw what we were doing. They were really excited about it. They wanted to expand us nationwide, which we were nervous about, understandably, because 1,500 stores is a lot,
Yeah.
especially, with a new product, like you said, with the education. We've really taken our time with retail. So um, Target happened 5 years into our business. So we really took those 5 years to like do as much customer education as possible.
Yeah.
But still, like most people in the US have no idea what granola butter is. So we still have a long way to go. But Target really wanted us because in the spreads category, you see some innovation in terms of like mixed nut butters,
Yeah.
but really flavor wise, it's super boring. Like flavor wise, like maybe there's a cinnamon almond butter, maybe there's a vanilla,
Yep.
but ultimately the flavor profile of nuts is so strong, right? Like you can have a cookie dough flavored peanut butter, and at the end of the day, it's still going to taste like peanut butter. So I
Yes.
think our product is so unique because oats are just this neutral canvas. So any flavor we throw on it, it really tastes like brownie batter, etc. So we were bringing all these fun, innovative flavors to the set and spicing it up because the nut butter category is actually declining because the consumption of bread is declining and they're tied together. So, and we're also bringing snacking to the spreads category because people just eat our product with a spoon out of the jar, which obviously most people don't with peanut butter. I'm sure some people do, but yeah. So I think that's kind of where. So when the Target buyer came to us, we really knew that retail was ultimately how we were going to grow because yes, we started on e-com, but at the end of the day, people are going to shop in the grocery stores. Retail is really, especially, in today's economy, it's like how people are shopping. So we
Yeah.
decided to lean hard into that.
So
and retail's been yeah.
when that happened, how did you figure out all the things you needed to do to, like, there's so many parts of that, right? You have to make sure your supply chain's right. You have to make sure you can deliver because otherwise you'll have them, you have to make, and then you have to make sure that your velocities are good. So talk about,
Yeah.
there's a lot that goes into it. So how did you guys figure all of that out? Especially because you were coming from tech, like this wasn't what you did, right? This wasn't what you learned.
Yeah.
In tech,
Yeah.
you went to med
No.
school.
I know, oh my gosh. I think honestly, our naivete has really helped us coming into the food space. And also we've made mistakes. I'm not saying it's like it's everything, but I think, I mean, even the way that I reached out to the Whole Foods buyer initially, like normally you would hire a broker and they would take a commission and XYZ, you would go, through all these set processes that we know now being in the food space. But I think sometimes approaching things from a different angle can save you time, can save you money, can, I don't know, set you apart a little bit. But when it came to Target, definitely they were such a big player that we needed to get our shit together. We needed to know like how things worked, right? It's not one of those things that you can kind of like, oh, like fuck around and find out. It's like you really need to, have things in line. So we talked to a lot of people in the food space. We have great consultants, who from Sun Butter, from Barney Butter, so other big competitors and other
Yeah.
players in the space are advisors to our company who are really, really, in the same category as us. So, great information from them. And then, Google. I mean, I think one of our strong suits is just problem solving. I think any
Yeah.
founder can attest to that. It's like, the answers aren't going to be there oftentimes, and it's just picking the most, decision that makes the most amount of sense with the information you have, and just kind of going for it. And sometimes it'll be right, sometimes it'll be wrong, but I think also being 5 years into the business and the way that we've approached retail is very much like after we were on Shark Tank, Costco came to us and they were like, "Hey, we want to bring you in." And we told them no. We were like, "We're not ready for you guys." And I think retailers really respect that
Yes.
because when you're not prepared for a retailer, it's so much work on both sides and they're going to be pissed if like they bring you in, they spend all this time and money on you and then you can't support, the velocities and the
Yeah.
volume. So
Yeah.
I think we also were just really well set up for Target. We're in a 50,000 square foot facility here in Cleveland now. We have tons of automation, so we have a team of 30. So we're a lot bigger than when we were in my parents' garage in San Diego.
Cool. I want to stop on how you reached out to the Whole Foods buyer for a second, because I think what you said is really important. Like at the beginning, you don't have to have all the things exactly right. You don't have to have a broker necessarily. I've heard other stories, not exactly like yours, where you went and you just kept trying emails until you got one. But I think that's a great thing for founders to hear, because sometimes all those things are expensive and they take a long time, but there are ways around it, and you don't think of them sometimes because you think you have to go through all the exactly right channels, and a lot of people who are successful don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, another example, I'm not gonna share the brand name because we're like still in talks with them, but multi-billion dollar company, like definitely a household name. So their CEO actually he sort of has like a passion project, like side hobby that he had an Instagram for. His Instagram had like, a couple hundred followers. And I actually DM'd him on his like, hobby Instagram page, which it took some rabbit hole, Google deep sleuthing to find. So I think just finding, different ways to reach out to people. I've also gotten in touch with so many of our investors through, Instagram. So Jamila Jamil, she's one of our investors. We actually did our brownie batter flavor with her originally. She's an actress. She was in like the Marvel movies and The Good Place and stuff. And she's also an activist. And, I DM'd her and I was like, hey, because she posted about us organically a couple times. And I was like, if you're ever interested in investing in a, food startup, like let me know. And that's how that started. So I think for me, shooting your shot is what I always, talk about doing that because you just never know. It's like at the end of the day, if people say no, then you're at the same place you were if you didn't reach out.
With hurt, or maybe hurt feelings a little bit, but so what, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. But I think there's so many times, yeah, it's like with raising money with anything, you're gonna get 99 no's and one
Yes.
yes. But all of the no's, oftentimes it has nothing to do with you. It's like something going on with them. I'm sure obviously there's times it does have something to do with you, but especially, it's like maybe they're just not in their maybe timing, XYZ. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And how to talk about raising capital. So I think that's a really hard thing for people because sometimes people offer you money and they're not the right people. And sometimes you get rejected 500 times and then you find the most right person. How did you go about that? I mean, it sounds like you went about it really creatively, but how did you decide who was right for you?
Yeah. So yeah, we've never taken any venture money. We've only taken, angel checks, high net worth individual checks, and a lot of those people are genuine, fans, super fans of the brand,
Yeah.
or former food founders. So one of our investors is Tara Bush. She founded Smart Sweets, another amazing female founder in the space.
Yeah.
And I really like having not only female founders, but just yeah, operators on our cap table because they get it. And not that, VC investors don't get it, but I think there really is that experience gained from running and starting and risking everything with your brand that
And
sometimes, someone
yeah,
who's just been in VC like doesn't quite understand, and that's
yeah.
okay. And I'm sure we'll, look to raise venture money down the line, but we bootstrapped for the first 2.5 years. I didn't take a salary for the first 3 years. So like we really did everything very lean in a lean way. And then, when we raised money, we first raised 600K from friends and family. Like our lead investor was Eric's older brother. So like we really just have only raised what we need. We try not to raise too much in the early days, but also being smart about how, the food industry is expensive. You don't want to get kind of caught in a place where, oh shoot, we have to raise money, but raising money takes a lot of time too. So
Sure
it's
does.
sort of this finesse, like, raising the right amount, not over diluting yourself, but making sure you're well funded, to launch into retail and stuff like that.
Talk about some of the challenges you've encountered because I mean, we all know there are challenges for every entrepreneur, every startup has them. What were some of the bigger ones for you guys?
Mm. Oh my gosh, how much time do you have now? Um, I think, something that I'll talk more about like the mental health side because I'm so passionate about that. I think the mental health side was really challenging as a founder. Obviously you have business challenges. Like I have a million and one stories of like things that have gone wrong on like the operations or just business side. But I think what's more interesting is, and people don't talk about is just how incredibly lonely and yeah,
Mhm.
and confronting it can be to be
Yeah.
a founder mentally. Thankfully, I have an amazing therapist. I would highly recommend anyone who's a founder to get a therapist because,
You're not the
especially, I
first person
co-founded
who
this.
said that, actually, just so you know. I've heard that a
Yeah,
bunch of times.
good. I'm sure. No, I hope not. But my co-founder is my fiance, right? So it's like there's certain things, which I'm so grateful for, and actually, I can't imagine it any other way. But there are things that I can't talk to him about because he's too close to it. So I think getting a great therapist. I think another challenging thing is even though you have a community of maybe other founders, even for me, other female founders, no one is really going to understand your business at the level, like every business is so unique. So you
Yeah.
still have this element of kind of feeling lonely.
Yeah.
And I think for me, what's tough is, I love like my employees are amazing, but at the end of the day, I'm still their boss. I'm still, someone who's paying them to do their job. So it's not like I have this built in network of colleagues and friends within the company. So it's like there's that loneliness there. And then something last thing I'll say, which has been kind of interesting, is every time we hit a goal that's like a bucket list opportunity. So like going on Shark Tank, getting into Target, being written up in Bon Appetit, like all these things that I thought were going to make me happy, and I was just like chasing. Yes, you have this little moment, this little like pang of, oh my gosh, this is amazing, but it is so fleeting. And then right after, you actually feel kind of unfulfilled and you're like, wait a second, what the heck? Like I've been chasing getting into Target for so long. And the day we launched, I was like, only thinking about all this shit that could go wrong.
Yeah.
And it was actually kind of stressful. And so I think I've gotten to this place 6 years in where yes, goals are important, right? And like chasing those things are important, but not tying all of my happiness, all of my fulfillment to that, because otherwise you're just going to be unfulfilled at the end. And I think a lot of founders feel that when, say, they sell their company and they
Yeah.
kind of hit this like final boss, the last stage in the entrepreneur game. They sell their company, they win the whole game, and then it's like, now what? And one of our investors, Jake Casson, he was the founder of Movement Watches,
Huh?
MVMT. And he talks about that a lot pretty openly about, mental health and how he struggled after they sold the company,
So,
more than ever, which is so
yeah.
interesting because when you're in it, you're like,
Yeah.
all I want to do is like get to where
Yeah.
you are. So it's like that interesting, yeah, paradox where, grass is always greener.
Is that your goal eventually?
You know, I think if you asked me a couple years ago, I would have said 100% yes.
Mm-hmm.
I think for us, and just given, like what the economy is doing, and people are now prioritizing more profitable, kind of like sustainable businesses.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. I think like I could also be happy getting to a place where um, I have more work life balance for sure. Like that's ultimately what I do want is
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
it's not sustainable to continue on, how hard we've been working the last 6 years. But I think also gone are the days where I'm like, oh, I just want to grow the rocket ship this thing, sell it, and then move on to the next thing. I think there's also something really special about like growing a long lasting brand. Okay, sure, paying yourself like a decent salary, having more work life balance. Like ultimately, I think those are the things. It's like I want to feel passionate about what I'm doing, but I also know that it's not sustainable to like keep working these crazy hour like
Yeah.
days and weeks. So it's like
Yeah.
finding some kind of balance. But yeah, I don't know. It's hard. It's like a hard question to answer.
That's okay. Just curious. What are there any founders that you like said to yourself like I love this person and I want to learn from them and follow them and be like them? Is there anybody that inspires you?
I really love Sarah Blakely. I like her energy a lot of Spanx.
Mm-hmm.
I just love how she, and who knows, maybe it's just the story, that the PR story she's telling, but like I love how scrappy she seems.
Yeah.
Obviously I don't know her personally, and kind of like how she really was, I mean, a pit bull. That's like the term that I like to use, which is just like not taking no for an answer or figuring out how to turn a no into a yes. Like that's definitely my style. Making yourself like so unavoidable, kind of towing that line between someone filing a restraining order against you and like getting yourself noticed.
I love it.
That's always like the line that I toe.
That's
So
amazing.
yeah, I think I really like her style. I mean, Tara, one of of Smart Sweets, I think she did an incredible job. Yeah, those two definitely come to mind right off the bat.
So you mentioned not wanting to like when you get to these milestones, you feel excited and then you feel a sort of drop off. What does get you excited? What makes you say, okay, this is something that I've been wanting and I love it and I feel really good about it? Are there things or are you really trying to just sort of temper it all and stay kind of even keeled?
Yeah. No, there are things. I think what I've learned is society and capitalism tells you that this is what should fill your cup, right?
Yep.
Getting into target revenue goals. And I think going internal, going inward and realizing, okay, what actually lights me up? For me, it's watching people interact with our product, enjoying our product, that sharing with their kids. It's kind of like, it sounds cliche, but it's like making an impact, and not even from like, oh, a PR standpoint of like, oh, I just want to make an impact. But like, really, I think in the early days, I was so fulfilled because I was answering all of our Instagram DMs. I was directly
Mm,
communicating with our customers. I was doing demos. I was watching people eat our product. And then, recently I've been like, obviously that's all delegated out. And I'm
yeah.
like, I'm so removed from our customer. And I'm like, why am I feel, why do I feel unfulfilled? Why do I feel like I'm not making an impact? It's because I'm not seeing like the direct impact like I did in the early
Yeah.
days. So finding ways, like this weekend, I'm going to, we have this thing in Cleveland called MGK Day, which is Machine Gun Kelly. He's like a big rapper, and he's from Cleveland. And so he puts on like essentially this big block party. There's like 10,000 people there. But we have a table, and I'm going to be like handing out samples. And I think just doing things like that you did in the early days, like really reconnecting to things that, lit you up early on, even if it's not like the most efficient or time effective.
Yeah.
It's important because otherwise, like, what am I doing? I'm like, you know, on my computer all day, but I'm not really connecting with like the end
I think
customer.
that's really interesting. I had someone on my podcast, my most recent one, actually. He's the founder of a coffee company called Purity Coffee. And he said every night, him and his wife read reviews that are left by their consumers so they can stay really connected. Same idea, just wanting to really feel what people are feeling to make them feel like it's worth it.
Yeah, 100%. No,
That's
it's
cool.
so important, and I think that also, like, I have a hard time finding, towing that line because sometimes too, you can get almost, like, so drawn into, like, the positive and negative reviews,
Yes, yes,
um,
yes,
but
yes.
but it is important for sure to, like, stay connected, so.
Yeah. Um, so you talked a lot about having to educate because it was a really sort of a brand new category or a brand new form of something that people didn't understand. And then you had to support your velocity. So how did you do that? How do you do the education? How do you now do your marketing?
Yep. Yeah, for us early on, we had obviously we were bootstrapped, so we had no marketing budget. I think early on we really leveraged influencer. That was
Mhm.
huge. It was definitely way more effective than it is in 2024.
Yes,
The
true.
2018, 2019 influencer era was amazing. I wish we could bring it back. But yeah, sending out free product. To this day, we still send out a ton of free product. So we sent out about 14 to 1500 packages just last quarter.
Wow.
So quite a few, yeah. And we have, just one of my employees, Molly. She does our whole influencer program. So we tested some like paid influencer campaigns. Transparently, the ROI just wasn't there for us. So we just like seed free product. And obviously, there's a cost to sending product, but ultimately, we feel that the ROI is much better there. So that's been really important for us. And then, boots on the ground, like demoing in retail is so important for us because our product price point wise is high enough that it's not just an impulse purchase. It's,
Yep.
between 7 to 9.99. So it's something that people really have to try to believe. Like I know you tried it
Yes.
at Fancy Foods, and once you try it, you get it, and you're like, "Oh my
Yes.
god, I need this in my life on everything." So yeah, just getting it in people's mouths, honestly, is really important for us.
What talk about I think it's an interesting conversation. Everyone talks about influencers when they're launching a brand. Like it is the probably first line for everyone. What are you feeling from the perspective of doing it a few years ago and now? Because I think there are also really big challenges, but what's your point of view on why that changed and why it's harder to do it that way, especially with paid influencers?
Yeah, I think back in 2017, I would like 2016 to 2019 was like the heyday, I would say. I mean, people were just there. Number one, I think saturation. So like there was less influencers back then, and people just trusted them more. Like if, my favorite influencer posted about a product in Whole Foods, like I would get in the car, I would drive to Whole Foods. Like it was much more of a pull and a true influence, in my opinion, versus now I think just everyone and their mom is an influencer, and people know the behind the scenes. They know that a lot of these influencers are being paid or influenced in some way by brands, so it just feels less authentic. I think TikTok is a huge opportunity now, though, that we didn't have a couple years ago. So like basically anyone can be an influencer is kind of what TikTok has created. And certain things can go viral, but I think you're also losing that with the creation of TikTok Shop, and it's just kind of feeling more salesy, more like an advertising platform, and so that even that I think is going to quickly drop off. But I think for us, the reason we're still sending out so many packages is because our product requires so much education. Even
Yeah.
if maybe the conversion isn't as amazing as it used to be, it's still great brand awareness. And we would rather have influencers communicate what granola butter is to their audience versus people hearing it directly from us because people trust influencers more than brands. So that's why we're still, investing there.
And what about other forms of marketing? Are you doing anything right now?
Yeah, I mean, we do like some minor digital ads, Facebook, Google, but nothing crazy. We're not one of those companies that's like burning money on digital ads.
Yeah.
We do it if we get a good return, but we turn things down if we're not. I think for us, because we self-manufacture, we're able to do these like quick, limited flavor drops on
Yep.
ecom. So that really helps. And it's kind of why you see like Oreo, for example, they launch all these crazy flavors. And, I was talking to, we were part of the Mondelez incubator program a couple years ago, who owns Oreo. And, they've talked about this in articles too. It's not like secret information, but every time they launch a new limited flavor, it actually boosts sales of their original Oreo SKU. So it really, I mean, it's brilliant. And you see so many companies doing these like either collab flavors with influencers, other brands, like it's so fun. And for us, it's so fun to do. So we'll do like a 6-week flavor, drop on our website only. And that's super easy for us to crank out. And then because of that, like our ads perform better, everything performs better because like that hype and excitement. So that's really important to us. We've been doing some like influencer flavor collabs recently. So we just did one with cherry pie. And then we're going to do another one actually in a couple weeks. So testing those out. Most of the influencers we partner with on those flavors are actually investors as well. So that ends up being a win-win for everyone.
Awesome.
But yeah,
That's really
just a little
cool.
bit, trying a little bit of everything.
Yeah. Do you do any, so you're in what, tell me the retailers you're in. You're in Whole Foods. Is that national?
National, yeah, Whole Foods national, Target nationwide, Publix is another big one we just launched nationwide. They're actually about same size as Target, which is crazy, even though they're regional to as the Southeast. But yeah, those are our top three, I would say, big ones.
Awesome. That's really exciting. And what's your goal? Like, where do you want to be in the next 2 years, next 5 years?
I really want, I mean, our ultimate goal for Oat Haus is to become just as synonymous as peanut butter, almond butter. Like, I want our kids, grandkids to be like, I cannot believe that there used to be a world without granola butter. Like, it's like Nutella or cookie butter.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's like ultimate goal, obviously. And just bringing joy to people through food. Like, that's definitely my love language. Personally, I would love to become a mom in the next couple years. I froze my eggs last year and I'm 32. So, I think I'm kind of like becoming a little disenchanted with capitalism and like girl bossing so hard. And it's sort of this weird place where, our business is just at this precipice of like, really stepping it into the next gear. And yet 6 years in, I'm tired.
Yeah.
And, I think ready for a little more work-life balance. It's like you can only hustle and grind for so long before it like really catches up with you. So I think personally for me, I know it's not like a popular answer, but just finding a little bit more work-life balance, and continuing to grow our company, but also enjoying my life and not,
Yeah.
spending
Well, it's
every waking
important.
second.
I mean, I will say, because I'm older than you, do find it, because otherwise you could literally never find it. Because all of a sudden 5 years go by and you're like, oh wow, I forgot that I was looking for balance and I still don't have it. Right? It could go on
Yeah.
forever. So I think it is important, and I think it should be a more discuss. I mean, I'm not saying you can't give up, right? You can't just be like, I'm not going to
Yeah.
work for a couple of weeks, because that's not balance either. But there has to be some, especially for entrepreneurs, because it is a grind. It's
Yeah.
relentless, and you could work I know you know, but you can work all the time without any
Yeah.
pauses, without any breaks, without any downtime. And that's not, we all know that's not good. So I think that that's a
Yeah.
really good thing. Um, I want to ask you, I know that we're getting to the end of the time and I want to be respectful of your time, but do you have some, I always ask people for advice for other founders, like what would be a couple of things you would say that you really learned that you want to share to help people either get someplace faster or avoid some of the things that were challenging?
Mm, I think this is kind of an unconventional answer, but I'm a big believer in documenting the journey. Even if you don't want to share it publicly, keep a journal. So I've kept a journal, pretty much almost every day since we started the business. And even if you
Wow.
just jot down like a couple words of, here's what happened today, I just think it's so fun to look back on. And I do it all the time. Like I'll look back on like the first, couple years, or even things have changed so much in the past couple months. And it also helps with perspective because things that feel so big and so scary in the moment, you have so much more perspective in even just like a couple months from now. And
Mm.
then it helps you when you do run into, future situations that are similar where you're like, okay, I know this feels big right now. It's going to be okay. So yeah, I mean, I'm a huge believer in like journaling and just documenting your life.
Do you know you're the first person who said that? And I think that's so awesome, because a lot of people have similar pieces of advice. And of course, we're all doing the same things and we go through struggles, but that's amazing. And I haven't heard anyone say that. And it's really interesting to think about because you do it, right? You're always documenting things because you're emailing and there's a record of stuff, but actually writing it down and going back to it and saying, oh, I already did this at one point and I learned something. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
awesome.
and I think, like, obviously you can document however feels most impactful to you. For me, I don't like, I'll document milestones, but it's more so how am I feeling
Yeah.
in regards to where we are with the business. And like then you can look back and see trends too of like interesting. Yeah, when we launched into Target, why did I feel depressed? And then what actually lit me up and what made me feel, really excited and motivated. So yeah, I'm a very touchy feely person. So I'm like always talking about my emotions, but I think it's helpful for me at least.
I think so too. And I think it's helpful for people because I think as entrepreneurs, you push that away a lot because there's so many things to do and you can't, like I've heard so many people say, and I feel this way to some degree too, if you go crazy on all the highs and then you are so far down on all the lows, it's a really unstable, hard thing to kind of get through, right? Because your emotions are controlling all the things. And so I've heard a lot of people say, just stay in the middle. And I don't know if I think that's good either. Like, I think understanding how you feel and why is really useful. And so maybe what you're talking about is even healthier than just trying not to have the wild highs and the wild lows, but really understand what the feelings are and why they're coming up. And I think that that's a cool way to look for the feelings that make you excited too. Like you said, so many things light you up and they weren't the things you necessarily thought they were going to be, but knowing what they are at least gives you the ability to look for them.
Exactly. Yeah. I used to be so terrified of emotions, which is why I had an eating disorder for so many years
Yep.
because I'm like, okay, I'm feeling sad, I'm going to eat. And I think a lot of people are, they're afraid to feel feelings and
Yes.
it's not comfortable most of the time.
It's
Like
not.
even to this day, I've gotten so good at it, but I will say like they're so important. And I just think of like feelings are just information and it's just like a check engine light, sometimes. And I also think writing is so helpful. And maybe for other people, this is not helpful at all. But like for me, getting like I think we can get so wrapped up in our heads and our brains and it feels really big up here. And then as soon as you see it on paper, it's you have that disconnect, you have that separation, and just feels more manageable too. So that's why it's always helped me.
Amazing. That's awesome. I feel like I've had a little therapy session with you today, so I really enjoyed it. Thank you. You have me
Yeah.
thinking about things. That's awesome. Anything else you want to add before we go? I mean, I think this is fantastic. I hope people try Oat Haus. I think it's a great brand. And I think it's so cool that you've launched something that's completely different and surprising in a category that felt like you said there was nowhere to go. You found somewhere to go, and I
Mhm.
think that's really awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, not much else to add. I would just say the last thing is like if you're listening and you're considering launching a brand, I don't know how many people are out there that are, not quite founders yet, but I will say like I remember being in that point where it's like, should I leave my full-time job? Like, should I take the leap? And I think the one thing that I'll die on this hill is like you're never gonna look back and regret going for it. And even though I'm sure a lot of these episodes, people are listening and it's like, oh, it sounds so hard. And it is challenging, but it also is so rewarding. And I want to highlight like how incredibly rewarding this journey has been too, because, working a 9 to 5, like obviously that's not a bad, like there's so many people that are happy in their 9 to 5. But for me, I think just, yeah, doing my own thing and following my dreams was so worth it and still continues to be worth it.
That's awesome too. And I don't want people to always feel like it's so hard because it is hard, but it's also really fun. And I agree with you. Like getting to build something on your own is different. And it's not for everyone. Some people don't want that. Some people want
Yeah.
the straightforward, and that's fine. But I think if you have that itch, I think that it's really
Yeah.
exciting. So cool. I'm glad you said that. That's another thing that people don't
Yeah.
say that often because mostly we talk about what's hard and what did I learn, but I think it's really cool to just remind ourselves that it's also really fun. Yeah.
Yeah. Totally.
Awesome. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
No, thanks so much.
It's been really fun to talk to you, and I know this is going to be a great one. So thank you.